Sounds perfect.
Okay. This is the next malacha we're doing is called mamachek, which is called smoothing. And this is for refuah for all cholim of Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
4 prohibitions. A, smoothing animal skin to make parchment. B, filing, rubbing, or sandpapering to make an object smooth. C, sharpening a knife. And D, thinning out a stiff substance, such as smearing tar or wax, using toothpaste, ointment, Vaseline, lipstick, or shoe polish. The prohibition of thinning out stiff substances does not apply to foods such as jam or chocolate spread, since these can be eaten in an unspread state. One should avoid wiping one's shoes on a metal grate, but one may wipe shoes on a mat, step, or wall. One may not use hard soap, but liquid soap is permitted. Ointment may not be rubbed onto the skin, but may be dabbed or applied on it with an absorbent cotton. And I discussed this with one of you guys the other day, toothpaste and ointment. You just apply it. You can't rub it in or massage it in. That's it. So that's it. That's smoothing. Machek.
Okay. All right, Kev, thank you for teaching us. We're starting on we're starting in the middle of the page on 45A2. Okay. Guys, please God, we finish to 46A2. It means we finished the 4th chapter. Our speed is incredible. Thank goodness.
46A2. Was that where we were supposed to go up to?
No, well, not at all. I went up to 47A2. It's 2 down.
Oh, today I only went up to the end of 45. I don't have
okay.
it to 40.
It's okay.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's a continuation anyway. Okay.
Yeah, so the Gemara elaborates, the rabbis taught in a brisa, 4 people take the place of the owner, in other words, 4 guardians, and are liable for damage done by an ox entrusted to them, just as the owner would have been had it damaged while under his jurisdiction. And these are an unpaid guardian, a borrower, a paid guardian, and a renter. Okay? If while the ox under the shomer's jurisdiction, it killed a person, then if it was a tam, it is put to death, and they, the shomrim, are exempt from the kofir. And if it was muad, it is put to death, and they pay kofir. And they are obligated to return. When we say the word return, the Hebrew word actually means reimburse the value of the executed ox to its owner, with the exception of the unpaid shomer, who is not so obligated. Okay? And basically, aside from paying kofir to the heirs of the victim in the event that the ox was a muad, the shomrim, the guardians, are responsible to reimburse the owner for the loss of his ox, whether it was a tam or muad. So it doesn't matter either way, because the animal was put to death, and that's no fault of the owner, because the guardian has an obligation to look after the animal on behalf of the owner. The animal was obviously put to death, so that's not the owner's fault. The unpaid guardian, however, is not liable for this. I mean, we learned that the unpaid guardian is actually doing the owner a favor, so he's got less obligation. So the Gemara analyzes the brisa. They said, what is the case? If the guardian guarded the ox, then even all the other shomrim besides the unpaid shomer should also be exempt from reimbursing the owner. And if he did not guard the ox, then the unpaid shomer should be liable to reimburse the owner, since the death sentence the ox received was due to his negligence. Okay? So what it's actually saying is that since the shomer guarded the ox, the only way it could have killed was through an ones, an unavoidable mishap, something beyond the control of the shomer. Okay? So if so, not only the unpaid guardian, but all the other guardians as well, with the exception of the borrower, who is liable for unavoidable mishaps, should also be exempt from reimbursing the owner for the loss of his ox. That's according to Rashi and Tosfot and Rambam. Furthermore, all of the shomrim, the borrower included, should be exempt from kofir. Why should they be exempt from kofir? Well, as far as Tosfot is concerned, that is as far as his responsibility to return the animal to its owner after the term of borrowing his owner. Even the borrower is liable for unavoidable mishaps. As regards his liability to other people who were damaged by his animal, the borrower is no more responsible than had the ox been the owner's, since even the borrower should be exempt from paying kofir if it killed due to an unavoidable occurrence. So what Tosfot is saying is, look, all the shomrim themselves are off the hook for something deemed an unavoidable mishap. What's unavoidable? Well, if you put in place correct guarding measures, it means that you haven't been negligent. So then there should be no payment owing. And only the borrower should pay and reimburse the owner, because even for unavoidable mishaps, like the animal got hit by lightning, the borrower has to pay for. Because when you borrow something, the person is doing you a massive favor by lending you an article you need. So therefore, you have to pay back even if it was hit by lightning. The only time you don't have to pay back as a borrower is if it died in the normal course of its use. So say, for example, you buy a car and it's been borrow a car and it's been deteriorating, and the head gasket goes through no fault of your own. It's not as if you caused it by the one time you borrowed it. So that's not your fault. That's a mechanical failure. If it's a case where, as a borrower, the car got hit by lightning and the owner wasn't insured, that's still your problem as a borrower. Okay. So what we're saying is here, they have an obligation, even the borrower, according to Tosfot, to pay back the owner for if the guarding wasn't done at all, and if the guarding was properly, only the borrower is entitled to pay back the owner. Why? Because it's an unavoidable mishap of which the borrower is obligated. However, as far as paying kofir is concerned, if you've done what you call a reasonable guarding, then they are not responsible of kofir, because it's not like the animal was free. And in the case where the animal was free, you were negligent in looking after a muad animal, in which case they hold you responsible in Shemaim. In other words, you might have bolted the door, etc., and the animal got out. So that's not your fault. That's not means you're liable for the kofir, but you still have to pay the owner back because his animal got put to death. So we learned that the rabbis, if the shomer returned the ox to the owner after it was sentenced to death, he is liable to reimburse the owner, even if the killing of the person was not due to his negligence, because the owner can claim that had the ox been returned to him before trial, he would have driven it out to a swamp. Okay? So why does the Gemara here argue that if the shomer guarded the ox, he should be exempt? The answer is that the ruling above applies only to where the ox was handed over to the court by the shomer. If the court seized the ox on its own, the shomer would not be liable. So, okay, so that's pretty clear. So the Gemara is saying, look, what are we talking about here? You've either looked after the animal, at which case you're exempt as a guardian, or you haven't looked after the animal, at which case you are fully obligated. So which one is it? So the Gemara answers, they say here, with what are we dealing? We are dealing with a case where the shomer, the guardian, looked after the animal with a lesser guarding, but did not guard it with a superior guarding. So one thing I want to make clear to you guys is that a lesser guarding doesn't mean a substandard guarding. A substandard guarding has a different Hebrew word. That's shemira pechuta. That means a substandard guarding. But a lesser guarding has a different wording. Okay, so what I'm saying to you in a nutshell is, don't think when we use the term in the Gemara lesser guarding, we're saying it's substandard. What we're saying, it is it's an average standard of guarding. He guarded in a way that under normal circumstances it would not be able to escape and do damage. However, the guardian did not take precautions to guard it against the unexpected. For example, he locked it behind the door that could withstand normal winds. That's the example by Rashi, but not behind a door capable of withstanding unusually violent storms. Okay? So when they use the term as lesser guarding, it just simply is in comparison to a superior guarding, which is a guarding that would be effective even in unusual circumstances. Okay. So, where the ox was guarded with a lesser guarding, but not guarded with a superior guarding, therefore the unpaid shomer's guarding obligation has been uncharged. Was the unpaid shomer's guarding being discharged, guys? What did we learn about an unpaid guardian? Yeah, but your camera's unfocused. Do you want to just wipe it?
Yeah, sorry, I just managed to get it on now.
No problem.
Trying to get this right.
Unpaid guardian.
Yeah. Why, if he did a lesser guarding, is he off the is his obligation discharged? An unpaid guardian.
Because he's not paid for it, and he doesn't have. It's not expected.
Correct.
Maybe
Correct.
that's why.
Correct. He's got less obligation because he did the owner a favor by looking after it when the owner went to Australia. So he has less of a responsibility than the other guardians. So if he didn't guard it at all, he'd be responsible. But since he did what we call a lesser guarding in comparison to a superior guarding, but remember, lesser guarding is still the normal sort of guarding that would be expected from a person. Still standard. It's not better than standard. So he's off the hook. As far as the other guardians are concerned, their obligations have not been discharged. Okay? So since exactly as Kevin said, since the unpaid guardian is liable for damage to the item only if it was the result of his negligence, Pashir, and in this case he guarded the animal in the way, guys, that most people do. He's exempt from reimbursing the owner for the loss of his animal. He is, however, liable to the atonement payment of kofir, okay? Because that has to do with the fact that he just did the minimum standard, okay? The paid shomer and the renter who must provide a higher level of guarding, as evidenced by the fact that they are liable for theft and loss of an item, even when it's not the result of their negligence, are not excused by having guarded the animal in the normal way. They were required to exert themselves beyond the ordinary amount in order to guarantee that the animal is preserved for its owner. That's according to Rashi. Okay, so the Gemara is going to ask a question. So before I ask the question, because the Gemara's got a bit of a problem with this, I want to just put forward some of the views of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, because then the question is going to become very apparent. Okay, so they said, in accordance with whose opinion is this brisa stated? If it follows Rabbi Meir, so we're going to discuss Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So what we're saying is as follows, is that in order to understand the question that follows, it's necessary for you guys to be acquainted with two separate and unrelated disputes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. I should have done a chart, guys, but unfortunately we had no power, so I couldn't. So you just have to concentrate here. Okay? So the first dispute, which is the subject of the next Mishnah in 45b, we actually touched on it before, concerns the level of guarding of an owner of an ox, or by extension a shomer, who takes the place of the owner. And what sort of guarding should be provided in order to exempt from having to pay damages if the animal inflicts? Rabbi Meir maintains that regardless of whether the animal is a tam or a muad, the owner is always exempt from paying for the damage only if he guarded the animal with a superior guarding. If he guarded it with a lesser guarding, in other words, ordinary guarding, ordinary compared to how most people would, he is liable. Rabbi Yehuda, however, holds that a superior guarding is required only for a tam. In the case of muad, a lesser guarding is sufficient. All right. Now, guys, I don't know if you remember the chart that we did a few dafs ago. Do you remember this? This is a repetition. So, Kevin, this is how it works. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda both find there's a verse that states that you have to do a superior guarding for a tam. Okay? But there's no such verse for a muad. So let me tell you Rabbi Meir's reasoning and Rabbi Yehuda's, and then you can come to understand where they're coming from. The first thing is, I'm not saying Rabbi Meir is right compared to Rabbi Yehuda, but I have an affinity with Rabbi Meir in this case, because he's saying, look, the reason why we need a biblical verse is it's not as obvious with the tam as it is with the muad. If your animal is a habitual gorer and is dangerous, and the court has warned you many times, whether you're the owner or whether you're the legal guardian, your responsibilities naturally are to do a superior guarding. Why? Because this animal is dangerous. And therefore, that's obvious. What's not so obvious is if the animal doesn't have a track record of aggressive behavior and is relatively tame, we would not know that a superior guarding is necessary. Again, the definition of a superior guarding is Alcatraz, Fort Knox, in whatever way that you can do to the maximum effort possible. So you wouldn't think that with regards to a tam, you have the same obligation because the animal's relaxed, it's chilled. And therefore, Rabbi Meir holds that the biblical verse, I don't know exactly if he holds like this, but I'm assuming, he holds that the biblical verse is coming to give you a chiddush in the case of a tam, meaning that you have to still do a superior guarding for a tam, otherwise the Chumash and Torah law would hold you liable, just as much as for a muad, as a safety precaution, okay? It doesn't matter if you're the owner or the guardian. So that makes sense. Rabbi Yehuda is saying something different. He said, all I know is that a superior guarding is required for a tam, as it says in the Chumash, but there's no such exposition given for a muad that you have to do a superior guarding. Okay? Now, this would seem to, as Gavin said once, it seems to be counterintuitive. Why is it counterintuitive? Because if you have to say that for a tame animal, you have to do a superior guarding, why wouldn't you think you could extend that with a Gezerah Shava or Kol V'chomer, not a Gezerah Shava, Kol V'chomer, to say, if for a tame animal you have to do a superior guarding, then surely for an aggressive track record, habitually destructive animal, you'd have to do a superior guarding. But Rabbi Yehuda says no, only according to the Torah verse you have to listen, where it says a superior guarding for tam, but muad, there's no such obligation. Now, the question arises is that would seem to be counterintuitive for a separate reason. And that reason is as follows, Gavin, is something that I'm just going to remind you, is that if you want to say that Rabbi Yehuda has got one thing in his favor, and that is, he says that muad payments are paid, the tam portion is paid from the body of the attacking animal, okay? And the muad portion, the rest of the half money to make full payment damages is paid from choice property. The full amount is not paid by choice property. So what he's saying is that even if there's no superior guarding and there's a lesser guarding, okay? You're off the hook for the muad portion, which is the half payment damages from choice property. But because the superior guarding was required for tam, you still have to pay that tam from the body of the attacking animal. Okay? That's one thing you've got to bear in mind, Gavin. If he turned around, like many of the rabbis, and say it's all payment from choice property, then this is the implication. You are saying then that for muad, where a lesser guarding suffices, okay, then you don't pay anything if you've done a lesser guarding. So there's no ways Rabbi Yehuda would say that a lesser guarding, you pay nothing in a tam, you pay half payment damages, because it's never a case where muad you pay less than tam. At least with Rabbi Yehuda's statement, he's still saying that you pay the tam portion, because he argues that the muad is only paid half of the balance of the half payment is made from choice property, but the tam portion remains in its place. Gavin, leave it, it's fine.
I don't know. All right.
It's fine, because I'm just getting that sort of distraction. It's fine.
Oh, sorry.
So, Gavin, do you see what I'm saying about Rabbi Yehuda?
Yeah.
If the tam would not remain in its place and the muad would not cover the shortfall, and he's saying that the muad would all be from choice property, then for a lesser guarding, you don't pay anything. But because the tam remains in its place, and only the muad is added to that from choice property, with a lesser guarding, you don't pay that muad half, but the tam part remains in its place from the attacking animal, and you would pay for that. The problem that I have with that is how would you pay for that? Because if we say it's the tam portion and the animal is being put to death, we learned that the owner of the ox is absolved by the pasuk, and even if not, the animal at which you're going to pay is put to death. So how do you pay? How can it be that you pay for damages, but for death, because the animal is being put to death, you're off the hook completely? That's my personal issue with it. I don't quite get it, to be honest, that part. So that's the first difference between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Again, Rabbi Meir says that if you pay in the biblical verse superior guarding, that you need a superior guarding, otherwise you pay for tam. It's obvious if your animals are habitual guarding, habitual gorer, you have to pay for the, you need a superior guarding for the muad as well. He said it's a logical conclusion. Rabbi Yehuda says we only need the verse to tell us there's a superior guarding needed from tam, not muad. That's the first argument. What's the second argument? The second argument has to do a dispute regarding the legal responsibility of a renter. Remember, there are four guardians: the paid guardian, unpaid guardian, the borrower, and the renter. So there's an argument there. Why? Because this basically the second dispute regards the legal responsibility a renter bears for the preservation of the article he rents. After stating that the borrower was given the article to use free of charge is liable for damage, even if the article results in an unavoidable mishap, the proof is Shmot chapter 22, verse 14. He declares that a renter does not bear as great a responsibility because he, the renter, paid money for use of the item. Okay, but exactly what level of responsibility the renter does have, that of a paid shomer, a paid guardian, or that of an unpaid shomer, the Torah doesn't say. But guys, there's a braise in various places of the Talmud, like Bava Kamma 80b, where Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda dispute this point. Rabbi Meir maintains that the renter is treated as an unpaid shomer, okay, while Rabbi Yehuda holds that he has the status of a paid shomer. Now, let me just explain to you again. I understand Rabbi Meir's point of view, that a renter should be seen like an unpaid guardian. Why? Because he's doing the person a favor by paying him money for his article. Is it not true?
Yeah.
He's doing the most, so he should be seen as somebody that, you know, in a certain way, the guy's doing you a favor because he's looking after your article by you going overseas, and he's not charging you. But if he's paying you, that is also a wonderful arrangement. So you can understand that how that's seen as advantageous, that he owes less of a responsibility because the person that owns the article is benefiting. Just like when one went overseas, somebody's looking after their dogs without charging. Yeah, the person is paying their dogs to be watchdogs for him. So again, the owner's benefiting. So that's why Rabbi Meir treats it as such. Rabbi Yehuda is saying no, it's like a paid shomer, a paid guardian. So you might say, guys, how's that possible? Well, I'll tell you how. If you go to Springbok Hire, I used to hire equipment for construction, for signage projects. If you hire a ladder or a jackhammer or anything, let's not talk about a ladder, because ladders, nothing really goes wrong. But if you hire a drill or an angle grinder or any piece of machinery, you sign a contract so thick you could kill a bearded dragon with it. And it says that if anything goes wrong with it, you have to pay for the repairs or the replacement of that article. Because even though the company is giving you money for, even though you're giving that company money to hire that article, they're doing you a favor also. Why? Because if you have to hire a cherry picker, we had to hire a cherry picker. That's almost like a forklift that gets high onto a building to do signage, right? So when you do a cherry picker, it's 300,000 Rand for a cherry picker, okay? And you're paying about 1,500 Rand to 2,000 Rand a day. Now, yes, you're giving them benefit, but if you destroy it, you've cost them 300,000 Rand. So the benefit that they accrue over one day is not worth the damage you cause. And therefore, just like a borrower, you still have an obligation to look after their goods. So you can understand it from both points of view. Okay, now we can proceed with the Gemara's question. Okay, so the Gemara asks as follows. They said, in accordance with whose opinion is the brisa stated? If it follows Rabbi Meir, who said that a lesser guarding is insufficient for a muad, so that the brisa's ruling is that if an ox is a muad, the shomrim pay the kofar, it's understandable. Why? Because if you're holding like Rabbi Meir, for a muad and a tam, you need a superior guarding. Of course, you pay the kofar. We understand that. But then we encounter a difficulty. What difficulty? Because it says, the brisa also, that a renter, so the problem is that Rabbi Meir also holds that a renter is similar to an unpaid shomer. Accordingly, let the brisa state, with the exception of an unpaid custodian and the renter. And if the brisa follows Rabbi, so what are we saying here? Is it said, let me just repeat for you what the brisa said. It said, look, if you do a lesser guarding, it's fine if you're an unpaid guardian, because you're doing the owner a favor. So you're not responsible for loss or theft, okay? Because you're doing the owner a favor. And he was saying, if you want to hold by Rabbi Meir, then it should say, listen, for an unpaid guardian, as well as a renter, a lesser guarding should suffice. Does that make sense? So we're saying on the one hand, we understand why there's kofar paid, because Rabbi Meir requires a superior guarding, but he said a lesser guarding suffices. The brisa says a lesser guarding suffices for an unpaid shomer. And if Rabbi Meir is holding that an unpaid shomer and a rent is the same as an unpaid shomer, the brisa should say an unpaid shomer and a renter. So we're saying that on the one hand, it seems to agree with Rabbi Meir that a lesser guarding doesn't suffice. But if there's a lesser guarding by an unpaid shomer, it's fine. But it should mention a renter if the brisa is according to Rabbi Meir. And it says, so too, we're going to have a problem with Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda states that a muad, a lesser guarding suffices. Accordingly, let the brisa state, with the exception of an unpaid shomer, and then let it state, and all of the shomrim, if the oxen and muadim are exempt in regard to kofar. Okay. So what it's saying is that, no, the brisa is implying you pay kofar, which doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda is saying, listen, if an animal is muad, you can do a lesser guarding. The brisa doesn't say that. They said, if you do a lesser guarding on a muad, you're responsible for the kofar payment, which is not according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the brisa doesn't seem to agree in totality with Rabbi Meir, nor does it agree with Rabbi Yehuda in totality. Okay? So since the brisa is discussing a case in which the shomer guarded the ox with a lesser guarding, and Rabbi Yehuda maintains that a lesser guarding is sufficient for a muad, the shomer should be exempt from kofar. That's according to Rashi. Why then does the brisa rule in its first section that he is liable to kofar? And even if you reply that when we said that the brisa refers to a shomer who watched the ox with a lesser guarding, we meant only that the brisa's latter section. But with regards to the first section, the brisa is discussing a case in which the shomer did not watch the animal at all, even with the lesser guarding. So that brisa's first ruling, if the ox was a muad, if it killed and the shomer paid kofar, is understandable. But the latter part, where it talks about a lesser guarding, is a bit problematic, because if the brisa said you're responsible for kofar for a lesser guarding, it means it can't be going according to Rabbi Yehuda either, because Rabbi Yehuda says for muad, a lesser guarding suffices. Okay. So what's the answer? So the Gemara answers Rav Huna bar Chananias Rav Huna bar Chinana said, who is the ton of this brisa? It is Rav Eliezer, who says regarding a muad, it has no means of guarding itself except for the knife. So what does it mean? Rabbi Eliezer said, even a superior guarding does not suffice. The only thing that will cure your responsibility is by shechting the animal, because it doesn't matter even if your guarding is the best. At the end of the day, you have to pay. If that animal damages, it doesn't matter if you stuck it in Alcatraz, you have to pay. The only way you can get out of paying is by shechting the animal. Okay? So as far as liability of the renter, Rav Eliezer concurs with Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda is saying that the renter is like a paid guardian, which means he's liable. So in that case, Rav Eliezer agrees with Rav Yehuda. So that's why it mentions here only the unpaid guardian. But he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. He's even more stringent than Rabbi Meir, that says that you're liable no matter what sort of guarding you do. Okay. Now, okay. And as far as the liability of the renter, Rav Eliezer concurs with Rav Yehuda, who says that a renter is similar to a shomer. Okay. Just let me check something. Okay, so we're saying an alternative solution. The buyer said, actually the brisa is in accordance with Rabbi Meir, who holds that a muad requires a superior guarding. Hence the brisa is ruling that the shomrim are liable to pay kofar in the case in which they are watched. The ox with the lesser guarding is understandable. And as far as your question that the brisa should have exempted also the renter from reimbursing the owner, because Rabbi Meir equates the renter with an unpaid shomer, the answer is the attribution of opinions in the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda regarding a renter, as Rabbi Bar Avuha reversed and taught them as follows. So, guys, what it's saying is, look, it's actually in accords with Rabbi Meir, who said that if you don't do a superior guarding for muad, you're liable. The only stumbling block we have is that Rabbi Meir holds a renter as an unpaid guardian, and yet when it mentioned an unpaid guardian, it didn't put a renter. So it's saying, well, how do you surpass that sort of issue? So Rabbi Ba'avuha reversed the order and says, a renter, how does he pay? And he says, Rav Meir says like a paid shomer, and Rav Yehuda like an unpaid shomer. According to this version of the dispute, Rabbi Meir equates a renter with a paid watchman. Hence the brisa, which ruled where the lesser measures were taken to guard the ox, the renter is liable to reimburse the owner, is consistent with Rabbi Meir's use. So the only way it could reconcile it is, it said, listen, it is according to Rabbi Meir, but according to, Rabbi Bar Avuha, he said that Rabbi Meir holds that a renter is like a paid guardian, and therefore he wasn't part of the exemption. All right, so we seem to have clarified it. I just want to see one thing here.
Yeah, Damon.
Yeah.
You see where it gets confusing, going back a few minutes, is where they say superior guarding versus
lesser guarding.
And for a tam, as not for a muad doesn't require it, but a tam does. You see, that's where it confuses us. It confuses me.
Correct.
It's very confusing because you should muad should have superior guarding. That's it, because you know what its track record is.
Exactly. So that's why we're saying that we could understand Rabbi Meir easier than Rabbi Yehuda. The only good thing with this Rabbi Yehuda thing is because he says that the muad portion is added to the half payment of the tam from choice property, that even if your obligations for muad fall away, that you don't have to pay the muad for a lesser guarding, the tam still remains in its place, meaning the full payments are not converged. The other rabbis say muad is one full payment from choice property. And it can't be, because if Rav Yehuda holds that for a lesser guarding suffices for muad, you can't pay nothing for a superior guarding. So if you say there's no muad at all, then you pay nothing. It would never be less stringent than a tam. But what he's saying, Rabbi Yehuda, is it's equal to a tam. The tam part you pay from choice property, and that's half payment. When your ox is muad, then you only have to fulfill the rest of your obligation from choice property. So it said for a lesser guarding at which you're not liable for the muad, that extra portion falls away, but you still have to do the lesser guarding for a tam, which means that tam portion pays in its place. So he's saying for a lesser guarding, whether it's a tam or muad, you still pay the half payment damages from the body of the attacking animal. However, that payment does occur with damages, but not with death, because we put the animal to death. That's the confusing part.
And maybe, regardless if the ox is a tam or a muad, it should be guarded very closely anyway, because an ox has the capacity to do damage, regardless
Correct.
of its
That's what Rabbi
status.
Meir is saying. He's saying, look, in a muad, you can understand why there's no biblical verse needed, because it's obvious. All the biblical verse has to say, in a tame animal, you look after its superior guarding. You do your best. Obviously, if the animal is habitually crazy, you have to do a superior guarding. It's obvious. So we understand. All right, guys, listen, I hope it made sense. It's about 9 o'clock. I got it going. Was this helpful?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, David.
I actually covered this afternoon. You said up to 45A3 or 45B2 or something.
Yeah,
up to the end of 45.
I think
not 45A1, 46A1.
Yeah, listen, the thing of it is just when you get a chance, maybe every day we read past this point. We're at 45B1. We're at 45B1. So I think just every day, if you read for 20 minutes from that point, then you'll be up to speed. Then you don't have to crash.